And we're live.
Hi.
Welcome. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to Lingofest. And thanks for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate it. Um,
Absolutely.
so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you some questions about yourself. And then we'll dig into the book that you just published with Diana Dybel. Um, I think it's a classic in my opinion already. It's an instant classic. It's a great book. It's well written. It's great to hold in your hands. I'm one of those people who just love books, so I love the fact that it was really nicely crafted. But let me ask you the first question I want to ask you is this. So, how would you describe what you do to a person who has never heard of voice user interface designers? I'm sure you do this all the time, but how would you go about explaining to someone what you do for a living?
Yeah, I'm sure, like you, we do have to explain this a lot. And I live in Brooklyn and I take a lot of lifts because I don't have a car. And if the drivers want to talk to me, they always say, "What do you do?" So I have had a lot of practice with this. So usually I start out by asking people if they know what a user experience designer is.
Hmm.
And if they say yes, I say, awesome. So I'm one of those, but specifically for conversational technology, stuff that you talk to, like a chatbot or Alexa, Siri, a talking refrigerator, stuff like that. If they don't know what a user experience designer is, I say, oh, I'm a person who plans and thinks about how people interact with technology and how the technology can work well for them. And I specifically work with talking technology. So those are usually the two branches. And again, I'm thinking in like conversational flows already, but those are kind of the branches that I use.
That's great. That's great. And I've been in the field a lot longer than you have. For the longest time, it was sort of shameful what we did, right? We did we did IVR, and then when you say I do those things, I design those things. When you call, so they just turn off at that point. Oh, you do those awful things. But it's good that we now we can say that we're doing cool things, right? So when you say you're doing Alexa and talking to the fridge, that's like the
Yep.
future, right? So for all those folks who have suffered all these years, um, it's good that we hang on to see this new era.
Totally.
um,
Well, and I hear people saying like, "Oh, we don't want our systems to be like IVRs," and I
mhm.
always want to call out like the work that we're doing builds on that work. We're not
Yeah,
actually doing
exactly.
something totally different and new. Tons of stuff that we know comes from that work. So
Yeah, yeah.
we all owe a debt of gratitude to you and your generation of conversational people.
It's very nice of you to say that. Um, I mean, the thing is this. I think the main difference, in my opinion, between IVR and the new form factors, aside from the telephone like that, you hold it, right? Is the fact that the IVR is you never really want to talk to the IVR, right? You call to talk to somebody, and so you're always at the disadvantage. You being the person who is designing, you're always like designing for somebody not to press the zero because they didn't mean to talk to the IVR. Whereas when you're designing for Alexa, they meant to talk to the robot. So you're starting from a positive note,
Hmm.
which
That's
is good, I
interesting.
think, because we all need all the goodwill of the user.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Um, so, as I mentioned, you published this book. Here it is, right? I've already scribbled. For those people who hate people who scribble on books, I use pencils very lightly, right? I don't use pens or highlighters, right? But now, when I scribble on a book, a lot means there's a lot of good stuff in it. So I have scribbled on it quite a bit. Um, and I'm going to ask you a basic question to start with. How long did you guys? How long did it take you guys to write this book? How did it start? Maybe you can give the story of the genesis and birth of this book.
Absolutely. So Diana and I had met in person a few times. And we were having a call about something, and she mentioned that someone had asked her if she was interested in writing a book. And she has a playwriting background and I have a fiction writing background. And so we kind of connected through that and other reasons. And she said, is that something you would ever want to work on together? And I said, sure, we could try it. And so, first step is like, we wrote a proposal and we made a list of publishers that we liked, Rosenfeld being one of them. And we just kind of put something out there, and we didn't really think it would take right away. But fortunately, after a number of months, Rosenfeld did say they were interested. And then we tentatively planned to write the book beginning of 2020. And we officially signed the contract and started writing the book in May 2020. And then we handed in final drafts in January 2021. So the whole thing was written during the pandemic, which, of course, presented some special challenges. But yeah, we worked on it for a little less than a year, and pretty in a pretty dedicated way. We had some tight deadlines and stuff. But luckily, Rosenfeld provides a lot of editorial support. So we worked with an editor the whole time who helped kind of steer us off some bad paths and push us towards being more useful and usable. So that's how it happened. And then we finished in February and the book launched in April. So it was very fast. Like
That's
once
fast,
we pencils were down, the team over there moved really fast to get it out.
That's wonderful. Do you think the pandemic, you said it posed some challenges. Did it pose challenges and provided maybe an opportunity to focus, or how did it play in the mix there?
Yeah, so answering only for myself, not for Diana, I moved from working full-time for Amazon Web Services to freelancing. And so I was able to kind of schedule my time around the book. And I did feel like the pandemic pretty much got rid of every possible distraction in terms of social engagement, travel, you're just sitting there like, got to work on the book at least a few hours a day to fill the time. So my experience was, in some ways, it was useful. And of course, the pandemic was awful and we didn't want it to happen, but it gave me something to do. Diana had a different experience because she was working full time. She's a design director. She's a parent. And so she really put in a lot of early mornings and late nights to kind of do her part. So I think we did have different experiences, and I'm very impressed with Diana for, having that on the plate as well as everything else.
Yeah. I mean, how old? I mean, if you have a certain age of kids, it was a nightmare. Like you have to be at home and all that. I mean, the schooling. So I bet she probably had, as you said, a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, and I think all parents, you're trying to teach your kids and keep them amused, and they couldn't really go outside in the same way, and they were lonely and missing their friends, and so it's just every parent made it through the pandemic. Like, God bless them. It was a very challenging time for parents.
I agree. Okay. I'm going to get into the book, like a couple of things I want to touch on specifically. But let me ask you this high-level question. What have you learned about what it takes to write a book? In this, I mean, every book is different and every person is different. But what lessons have you taken about the process of writing something like this?
I think the main thing that comes to mind, and this is kind of a classic thing, is that you have to write a draft of the whole thing before you know what shape it should take. And often you realize the shape it should take is not the shape that the first draft is in. So Diana and I redid the structure several times. At a certain point, it had different sections. I mean, pieces in the beginning moved to the end. We did a lot of debating about whether or not the ethics should be its own chapter, so you could kind of visit it, or whether it should be dispersed throughout the book. And we kind of ended up doing a little bit of both. But I do think the main lesson for me was like, that first draft is you figuring out your own thoughts. Mm-hmm. And then the rewriting that you do is figuring out, okay, how do we optimize getting those thoughts in a position for other people to receive them? But that's something I've heard novelists say as well. So I sort of had, like I said, it's like a classic realization of your first draft is kind of you talking to yourself. And then after that, the next draft is about you talking to other people.
And so you have a background writing fiction, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference? Do you write short stories, novels, novellas?
Short stories, definitely. Short to very short stories.
Okay. And those are two different experiences of writing, I'm assuming, right? Writing a short story. Is a short story a burst of the thoughts, of a feeling, of a scene, and or do you also revise it and get to know exactly what you're trying to say after a few iterations? What's the difference?
Yeah. To me, one of the main differences is, when you're writing a short story, I think, well, I'll start with a similarity. I think the goal is, as a writer, is to always kind of maximize the chances that some, or, most, but maybe just some readers are going to understand what you meant and get a lot out of it. And like you and I both know that language is a translation of thought. And so it's inherently like a challenging thing to do, to try and make yourself understood to other people. But, so even though fiction is more about my own ideas or thoughts about how people experience the world that I want to kind of communicate, and this book was very much about communicating information. Both of them do require, iteration towards a more perfect, better communicated thing. And both of them, you do some form of like testing. So, I have an MFA in fiction writing, so we do workshop our pieces. And that is a form of, you might think of it as usability testing. And our book, we had a ton of readers in addition to the editorial staff to give us all that kind of feedback. But the main difference, and in some ways, I'm looking forward to going back to fiction for a little bit just to flex those muscles. But stories are very much about a feeling or like a human experience that I want to communicate that I think other people are interested in or other people have experienced, where the book was definitely like kind of a snapshot of where the field's at and how to get some things right. So different end goals. And I should say the book will probably be read by a lot more people than my stories have been.
Well, maybe you can piggyback your fame in movie design.
Yeah.
Be the person who also does these short stories. So one thought I had is in fiction, do you have like an audience you're targeting, or is it simply an expression of yourself, and whoever reads it? Whereas here, you're focusing on a target audience, and maybe you can tell me, if that's the case, who is the target audience? Maybe I can answer the first question is, do you think that's one difference? Like you're not really targeting somebody, you're just expressing yourself in fiction versus... Okay.
That's such an interesting question. And it's something that's debated a lot in fiction circles. Like, is it artist first or do we think of audience? And I think a lot of writers do think about that ideal reader that may or may not resemble themselves. I would say that for myself, when I'm writing a short story or something like that, it is very much my taste, my sentiments. I'm interested in following a thought or an experience that I have. Even fictional, it's still, something about human nature I'm trying to explore. So I would say that I do think a lot, like I was saying earlier, about how to edit and write to maximize the chances that it's very clear what's happening in the story itself. But I tend to not think about the audience very much. In the book, we definitely talked a lot about audience? Is it for beginners? Is it for people with a lot of experience? Is it for people who already have this job, for people who want this job? Do developers get anything out of this book? Do product managers get anything out of the book? And in some ways, that's why I like fiction, because it's your vision first and foremost, whereas the book is more in service of others.
Yeah. And so, who is the target audience for your book, your Vui book?
Primary audience would be people who want to be conversation designers, and people who already have, who are already conversation designers, who either want to have some ideas crystallized or want exposure to new ideas and processes. So the conversation designer was the main one. But we did, because we think it's so collaborative, like we did think about how like useful it would be if a team, if this book can help teams align on some things together. So I would say our secondary audiences were anybody on a conversational interface team, whether it's a developer, a PM, a business analyst, a copywriter, or a UX generalist who just wants to kind of hone in on, kind of add conversational considerations to their skill set.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely see this being useful to all members of a team who are trying to launch a highly usable experience, for sure. And so how would you, let's focus on the designer, right? The person who is tasked with taking some high-level requirements, the user shall do this and that and that and that, functional requirements, and then sits down and starts building the design. How would they use this book? How would it be a reference? Or should they sit down and read some chapters first, just to get the sense of some baseline meat that they should have if they just started doing design? Like how would let's just take somebody who just started dabbling, right, with designing on their own, because we all have a certain level of expertise in being conversationalists, and I think that's the danger, right? And so we start from that baseline. Let's assume that that we have such a person that they really are eager, they have the energy, and they want to learn. How would they use this book? How would they start making the most of what you guys have put together? For a person like you're describing, I think our chapters 1 and 2 are, one, not that long and pretty interesting. I'm a little biased, but I think they're pretty interesting. The first chapter is kind of a fast, like, what is this stuff and why is it weird, basically? Yeah. And I think we did a good job of kind of explaining the vastness of it. I think a lot of people kind of enter through either making a chatbot or making it something like an Alexa skill or an action for Google Assistant. And those can feel kind of constrained. And we wanted to just communicate, like, this is a big world. And then our second chapter is our, linguistics light chapter, where we're just like, here's some stuff that's really significant about how people talk to each other. And this is kind of what the technology is up against. And I think that chapter 2 gives that really basic kind of calling out some things that we as pretty instinctual speakers take for granted. So I think those are the places where people tend to go, oh wow, this is kind of a different world than I thought. And I think those are a good baseline. And then from there, I do think our book is really good for dipping in and out of. I think that the index is professionally done, so you can look up topics or people or terms. And I do think it's a really useful reference to just dip in and out of, depending essentially on like what you're working on. Like if you're writing prompts this week, check out the prompts chapter. If you are trying to put together training data, an interaction model of some kind, dip into the chapter about that. Yeah, no, my reaction is that it starts in a way that's not intimidating, but it sobers you up in the sense that, hey, this is serious business if you want to build something highly usable. So I think it has the merit of being accessible as well as allows you to go deep into many important aspects of designing. So let's go to the book specifically. I'm going to start with page 98. I'm just going to pick because I've been doing this for so long, I'm going to pick like the ones that intrigue me the most, right?
Awesome. And I should interject and say your book was one of the first that I read.
Oh, the pamphlet, yeah. That was a quick pamphlet I put together in a couple of months just to get something out. But thank you so much for mentioning it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was huge. It was so useful. For a long time, for years and years, I was self-taught. And so when I realized like there are books about this, it was significant just kind of having that expertise at hand.
Wonderful. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so on page 98, you talk about small talk, right? And then you write, well-executed small talk can help humanize the bot and help foster trust. So this is a pretty loaded sentence because it has an important word, right? Humanize and help foster trust. So what did you mean by that? Because somebody could interpret it in the wrong way. But what did you mean when you wrote that sentence? When you guys wrote that sentence?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this area is one that's so debated among conversation designers. Like, are these things supposed to feel like people, or are they not? What does it mean when we say it should be conversational? What do we mean when we say it should feel human? So building trust is something that needs to happen really in any interaction. The stakes, I think, are higher in conversational stuff. But that's true of an app. That's true of your email service. That's true of all technology. We have to trust that it's going to be there the next day, trust that it's going to be useful to us. But then the bigger bit is the like humanizing part. And it gets complicated pretty fast because any chatbot, even if it's just, giving you the weather, something really simple, is imitating humans because it is using language. So to some extent, it has to be on human terms. Like that's the whole premise of the technology. Small talk, and something we mentioned in that section is like we have in a different chapter a discussion about whether your system needs to be a pal, kind of like a figure, a presence, like an Alexa, a Siri, that you have kind of a long-term relationship with, or whether it's explicitly technology that you talk to. It's not your friend. It's getting something done for you. It's very transactional. And so the trick with small talk, I think, is for something that you have more of a long-term relationship with, small talk is useful for rapport building the same way that it is with people. And so if people ask a question that's not really task related or kind of just for fun, and they get a good answer, that does kind of satisfy. But when you're ordering at a voice kiosk and you're ordering food, small talk really shouldn't come up. So one of the challenges in writing this book is that like every topic touches every other topic. So in some ways, dividing stuff out into chapters is just a challenge. It's like I want to put a string from this part of the book to the part of the book in personality. So yeah, so to us, humanizing is maybe the idea that we're getting closer to not just using language, but to expanding kind of the toolkit of rapport to small talk, which is something that people do with each other.